I'm Megan Skidmore, and welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts on a faith journey and all aspects of life. Join me as I bring this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the light. I firmly believe we normalize through more talking and engaging in discussion. More talking peels back, exposes, and erases the layers of shame associated with asking questions and allowing doubts. When we are more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. Beyond the Shadow of Doubt is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, which is part of the Dialogue Journal found at dialoguejournal.com/podcast. Founder Eugene England was a Mormon writer, teacher, and scholar who wrote, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue. My hope is that this podcast is an extension of that vision." Welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast today. So grateful that you took time out of your schedule to join me and my guest. Super excited to have Autumn McAlpin on to give you the opportunity to get to know her and her beautiful spirit and the beautiful person that she is, her self-appointed mission in this space of the intersection of being an LGBTQ plus mama and a member of the LDS faith. I'm really excited for y'all to get to know Autumn and hear from her, the peaks and the valleys that come with this experience. Welcome, Autumn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So glad to have you. I always like to get started by letting our listeners know a little bit more about you, your background story, where you're from, your family of origin, a little bit about growing up, faith of origin. I don't assume that it's LDS. I interview folks from all different faith backgrounds. Your schooling, anything that you feel comfortable sharing that would be good to know and pertinent to this journey. We want to know all the things.
Well, I'll just dive in.
Yes.
Try to tell you the short version of the story, but I am a storyteller by trade and by interest. I've always been a storyteller. So I'm just going to crack in here. So I was a BYU baby, meaning my parents were BYU students who had babies while they were students. And I was born in Provo, Utah, and we moved around quite a bit until I was 5 years old, where we settled in Tennessee. And so I grew up right outside of Memphis, Tennessee, in a little suburb, and spent my whole childhood, teen years there. And I was just right in the center of the Bible Belt. I was the only LDS girl in my high school, and I went to a very large high school. And I would say probably 95% of my friends were Christian and identified as Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian. So really steeped in the Bible Belt culture. And I remember as a youth going to my friends' houses and seeing, like, one of my friends had a bulletin board that had a card on it that said, "Friends I need to save." And she was actually my best friend at the time. And my name was number one. So I was her number one project.
Your name was number one on her board to save.
Yep. So I was the project of the South, but my family kind of stuck out because there were 8 of us kids, and most people in our town had 2 kids, and there were 8 of us. And my mom was kind of a free spirit. Like, she has funny stories. She'd go to the dentist and prop her feet up in the chair and see she was barefoot, and stuff like that happened to her all the time. You know, life was hard. This is before cell phones. We had no hired help. She did everything by herself. My dad traveled constantly, and my mom just ran this brood around in one of those big old conversion vans and would just drop us off at our sporting events. And hopefully she'd remember to come back and pick us up later. You know, that's just kind of how we rolled, and I was very involved in everything. And I'm the only non-athlete in my family. Everyone else is really talented athletically, but I was the nerd. I was very into school and drama and theater, and I was like student body president and things like that. So I was very active in my community. And from a young age, my mom raised us with a perspective that was not only unique in the LDS culture, but also in our surrounding regional culture. She was from California and definitely more open-minded and spirited than a lot of the people around us. And we spent a lot of weekends volunteering in inner city shelters, taking care of, women in crisis and their children. I spent a lot of time babysitting children while my mom would teach their mom's classes. And so I grew up with this perspective, like racially like the neighborhood I lived in was predominantly white, but my weekends were spent immersed in other cultures and learning about other people. Mm-hmm. And you were not allowed in my family. Like nobody in my family is racist or, really homophobic. Like we learned how to be open-minded to other people. That being said, because we were LDS, a lot of people looked at us like we were crazy, the enigma. I always got asked how many moms I had, if I was allowed to cut my hair, all kinds of random questions. And, where I lived, youth group meetings would be like, I'd have friends who would say, oh yeah, we watched the God Makers for our youth night activity. And, do you really believe all these things? And
yikes, so I remember that.
So I grew up with that kind of dichotomy. I was learning like, oh, I don't fit in. And not only did I not fit into my surroundings, but I always kind of struggled to feel like I fit into the church. And there's a reason for that. I think that was kind of in my DNA is, while I'm mostly Scottish, Irish, Welsh, there's a 2% of me that's from India. And one of my ancestors is kind of a legendary pioneer in the LDS faith. She's from Mumbai, India. And she was baptized by her husband, who was a sea captain from Portugal. And she crossed the plains with the Willie Handcart Company. And her husband was off sailing. But when she crossed the plains, she was by herself with 2 young babies. One of them died along the way. And she settled in the Logan Valley. And she believed, she gave up her upper caste Indian background to become Christian, come to the States, do this whole thing. And when she settled in the Logan Valley, she found herself very much alone. Back then, racism was pretty steep, even in the LDS faith, and people kind of ostracized her because of the color of her skin. And I grew up with this heritage of this woman was very strong-willed and strong-spirited. Her name's Elizabeth Xavier Tate. And many of her progeny have told stories about her and just what a strong woman she was. She never let anyone's opinions get her down. And she just raised her family of 10 kids, was a school teacher with her husband, and really had a pretty remarkable life. Because of that lineage, we have this thing in our family called the Tate woman curse. There's 5 generations of women, 6 since her, of really strong women through my mom, my grandma, my great-grandmother. And they've all gone through unique experiences in the LDS faith where they were ostracized for one reason or another. And my mom, grandmother, and great-grandmother were all divorced. And in some cases were done wrong by patriarchy and by leaders. And they all maintained a really strong backbone and fiber of belief in a God. It didn't always look like a very active church activity experience for them, but they knew who they were, they knew they had value, and they emanated that. And my mom didn't necessarily fit the mold of the traditional Southern woman or LDS woman in some ways, but she raised us with core Christianity values. And so for that, I feel like I was raised with nuance. I grew up in a world where a lot of my mom's family was not religious, but they were very good humans, really good humans. And then some of my other relatives were more religious, but I struggled sometimes to feel a sense of belonging or love from them. So from a young age, I kind of was in this world where for me, it doesn't rattle me too much when people disappoint me who claim to be religious, because I didn't necessarily trust that because you were religious or a leader in a religion, that made you a better person than others, just the way I was raised. And so I really value the teachings of my mother and some of her friends who taught me true Christianity from that young age. So that's how I grew up. But I did, when I turned 18, my family kind of had a BYU or bust rule, and that's what they would pay for. And so I didn't really want to go to BYU, but I did go to BYU. And I definitely did not want to get married at 19 like my mom and have a bunch of kids by the time I was 25. But that's exactly what happened.
And you're going to say that.
Yeah. So I met my husband actually in high school at a summer camp called EFY. So we met when we were very young, but we re-met out at BYU. He was from Georgia. I had wanted to marry a California boy because I wanted to live in California. But I met my husband again. We started dating, and I convinced him, I graduated before him, and convinced him to move to California. So we've lived in California our whole married life, and we've raised 4 kids here. And I did have all 4 of my children, my biological children, by the time I was 29. And I've been working for 20 something years now as a writer, filmmaker, storyteller. And now I mostly work in the nonprofit space. I work with a lot of LGBTQ causes since our son came out as gay 3 years ago. And I also work, just like my mom, I work in our local resource center. We have a women's shelter and we have a food pantry in our town, and I work there as a volunteer. So that's kind of my life now.
I got to take a deep breath here. That's a lot. Good for you. Thank you for sharing that with us. So impressive. And I can feel your strength. I can feel your Elizabeth. Is that your ancestor's name? I can feel the spirit of Elizabeth in you. And I can definitely feel that sense of pride that you have in that lineage. That's
I'm
really
very
cool.
grateful for these women. They're really amazing.
Yeah, I think it's so important to learn our stories because, well, they're literally ingrained in us. We're born with them. The more I'm learning, the older I get. You said that you had your 4 biological kids. Is there more? Do you have more? Or
Yes. Well, so we have a few bonus children who are
kids?
currently all adults now. They're now all adults who, a couple of them are LGBTQ kids whose parents didn't necessarily embrace them. And I wouldn't say they're at my house 24/7, but they spend holidays with us, or, if they need a place to go, they've got a place here. And then I've also been a foster mother. And actually the past 2 years up until May of this year, we had a teenager who lived with us. And so, yeah, all in all, we've had a few kids live with us over the years, and we are known as a safe house in our community where if kids get kicked out, especially for being LGBTQ, we've had a lot of kids on our couch at times. So some of them call me mom. So I tease that they're my kids. So I'll call my bonus kids, but it's not like a legal official adoption.
I think that's awesome. I'm surprised continually at folks that I talk to that don't realize that is a reality for LGBTQ plus kiddos, that they really are kicked out. It can be mind-boggling and mind-blowing, but it happens. And so thank you for being that space for them. And thank you for just telling it like it is. It really does happen. And those kids are lucky. What a cool thing to be known as. We're the safe house in the community.
I think sometimes my kids are like, oh, really? Like we had, I shouldn't say this, but after our foster son left, we got 2 applications the next week from kids who I kind of think we live close to the beach and we have a pretty decent view. And I think they just wanted the view. I was like, we're going to take a little break for a minute.
Oh, bless you. You're allowed to be human and allowed to stop to catch your breath.
Yeah, sometimes it's necessary. But
so, wow, your legacy of faith is strong and the roots are deep. You're self-described as having grown up with some nuance and kind of not fitting, if one exists, this box, this quote unquote normal box, I suppose. So knowing that, what role did your child's identity or coming out play in your faith journey?
It's a great question. By the time he came out, let's see, 3 years ago in 2020, which we all know is a year that many children came out, the year of hibernation.
Yes, it is.
The cocoon year is what a lot of us in this space call it. By the time he came out, I had actually gone through probably 3, if I really think about official awakenings of, as a youth, I always felt a conflict with just the logistics of not feeling like I fit into the surrounding belief systems of most of my friends. Like I definitely stood alone in my LDS faith, but I also within the LDS context was like, okay, there's certain things about this religion. I don't know if I connect with that. And so in my 20s, I went through my church history phase that many of us get into where we discover things about our faith origin that maybe we're troubling or we don't understand or agree with. And, I went through the whole like polygamy in the LDS church and things like that discovery phase in my 20s and kind of struggled with, some of the patriarchy and some of the issues that didn't necessarily align with my full belief system. And then I worked in the entertainment industry and have for actually most of my life. As a teen, I was on camera, and since I've been behind the camera. And a lot of my friends in the entertainment industry are gay and, bi, queer, lesbian, trans. And I've actually made a movie with a bunch of very famous drag queens in it. And so I've been immersed in a community where I think at 12 was the first time I really got to know a gay man up close. He was a makeup artist I worked with, and he was so fun and so great. And I loved him. And it kind of shook me from the get-go. And he was just another human in my life. And so I wouldn't say like my kids knew, like for us, I'm sure we said things we shouldn't have when they were young. I'm sure we said things that came across sometimes maybe as a little homophobic or a little kind of like, oh, the ideal would be for you to go this route in your life. But I don't recall like having this major mind shift that happened when our son came out. The shift that happened for us was that he, of all my kids, was the most obedient, like so many of our kids, like most obedient, sensitive, kind, faithful, like, read his scriptures and was just very sensitive to trying to be like this perfect child. And in a way that made it so hard finding out later that he had buried this he said he knew when he was 11 he was gay, and he didn't tell us till he was 17. And it just broke my heart that for 6 years he knew this about himself, but was trying to navigate it on his own. But again, like, this is a kid who, when he was 6 or 7 years old, he was in a primary class in my, like a little kid Sunday school, and my friend was the teacher, and she came up to me one day and she goes, "Your son is so sweet. There's something special about him." She said that they'd been teaching a lesson about Joseph Smith, a Mormon prophet, and they gave this whole lesson about him. And at the very end, my son sat in the class and wouldn't leave, and he was kind of bothered. And she's like, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I just want to know more about Emma. What about Emma? Why don't we ever talk about her?" And so from a young age, this little boy just had a wider lens about some questions within the church frame, And so he and I and my husband were very attuned with a lot of our thoughts on things. He's very scientific. He questions a lot. And, around 14, started questioning the viability of how God fits into a scientific context. And, so along the way, there were these things that made it where he's definitely my smartest human in our family as well. I think we'd all say that. He's one of those genius kids. So when he came out and said he was gay, there was no dispute, like knowing his creation, who this kid is,
his personality and who he was. Yeah.
Yeah. A kid who's never lied to my knowledge in his life. There was no doubt in my mind that what he was saying was real, that it was true, that was valid. And not only that, but he was about to launch us on a journey that was going to shake and shift everything. And surely it has. And he told us in the same conversation, "I'm gay, I'm done with the Mormon church, and I am really struggling with my mental health," like so many do in this space. And so that number 3 confession became the hardest thing for our family. Obviously, like number 1, we didn't care if he's gay, that's fine. No big deal. That wasn't actually a problem for any of us. His siblings instantly rallied around him. Like nobody had a problem with that. And actually extended family as well. Like we're pretty fortunate that just about everybody was very kind and loving and accepting. But the whole mental health thing was really hard. And luckily it was for us the cocoon year where we were able to take that time to hibernate with him and process with him. And he did come out to a select group of friends. He chose like 5 of his closest friends. I can't say they all reacted well. One girl made it her mission not to talk to him anymore and try to, did some things that were very hurtful. And the others, some of them were amazing and really tried. It was really hard at that point for him. He will say he has religious trauma and PTSD. He would give me permission to say that. And it's been very hard for him where he's at right now as a 20-year-old to separate the LDS faith from God or separate it from everything. So to him, it's a cluster almost where it's still hard for him. Like he's only been back in a church building twice since he came out 3 years ago, once for his sister's missionary homecoming and once for a cousin's baptism. Both times created a pretty strong reaction of PTSD. It's not a place we ever expect him to go. And I've actually received a very strong confirmation he's not intended to be there and it's not for him right now or ever, and to not worry about him. He's fine. And I don't worry about him. And so it taught me more about religious trauma, I would say, than what it's like to be gay. I think I kind of knew, but at the beginning there was that learning curve where I knew I needed to ask him more questions. He has said that's the one thing that, and I've heard other families say this, that those first few months, like we processed it that day, we talked a little the next day. He wanted to come out publicly on my social media because he didn't do social media at the time. And so we did that like probably a month later. And then after that, I mean, I don't know what we were thinking, but we were kind of like, okay, this is our new normal. And he says, I wish you all had asked me more questions. And so that's something I like to tell parents new in their journey is I've heard a lot of kids say that in this space, like they wish their parents had asked them more questions. I don't know if it's because I didn't know what to ask or if I just thought everything was fine. I don't know, but there was a long period until he graduated from high school where I think I could have probably probed more, checked on him more. I was doing the best I could, but I think that's something I've heard again and again. But since absolutely, it has shifted the paradigm of faith within our family unit completely. My oldest daughter is a return missionary for the LDS Church. She is graduating next spring from BYU, and she's very involved in the church. And the rest of us are finding our place in our spirituality and our practices. And it's definitely shifted us. I don't like to define things, but currently I would say that we definitely take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time where we're at.
That's all that we can do. I think that's all anybody can do. I myself, I totally hear you. I'm learning so much and have learned how fluid all of this really is. Our understanding, my understanding, I too came to a point where I really had to separate religion from spirituality. I hear you about what you're saying regarding your son's journey. My heart goes out to you and to him, his struggle to separate those two, because from a very young age, yes, that is what's taught, that there's basically one place to find that. You know, you and I have commented before I hit the record button, we were talking about traveling. One of the reasons why I love traveling so much is how much it broadens your perspective. I remember as a student, the first time I visited this cathedral in the countryside of France, and it's the Chartres Cathedral. It's actually called Notre Dame de Chartres. And there was no mistake in my mind or in my heart. I felt the Spirit while I was there. When I reflected on the story of these peasants centuries ago who built this edifice to have a place to worship in the way that they knew how to worship the divine. And it took them so long that each side, one was Gothic and the other was Romanesque. You might know this cathedral. And I was just overcome with emotion and with love, and just so impressed with this dedication. And that for me was really the first time where I knew I could feel God and his love, their love, outside of what I knew up to that point, an LDS chapel. I mean, I had served a mission, and I also had visited my mission president encouraged us to visit other churches. So I visited Jehovah's Witnesses. I visited, the Catholic cathedral in downtown. I went to Houston, went to Catholic midnight mass for Christmas Eve.
I love that you shared that story. My body's like firing right now, because actually, so I don't know if I've shared this story publicly, but I was misdiagnosed with a fatal disease when I was 32 years old.
My goodness.
There were 6 weeks I thought I had ALS and had 3 to 5 years to live. I had 4 young children. And I was properly diagnosed with CMT, which is in the same family, but not fatal. But those 6 weeks of last chances, it woke me up to, now I do hourglass living, where I do everything I want to do, and I do it as quickly as I can. And I try. So my disease now, while it's not fatal, it's progressive and it's crippling. And so when I was diagnosed at 32, they said, you'll have 10 years left of walking. And it's funny, because what I normally do is I go out and I wrote a play called 10 Years Left, and I create all these entertainment materials about these things. And my husband's like, this isn't that funny. I'm like, no, it's not funny, but everything's a little funny. But anyway, so I started living life to the fullest. And the very first thing I did was travel. I changed my life to one of travel. Mm-hmm. And up until that point, I'd never left the States. I think I'd only been in like 5 states or 6 states. And so we started traveling extensively. And I know you and I have talked about this before, how we both have traveled quite a bit. Love it. And the first thing I did is I went to Italy, and we went to mass. And that was my jar opening, shelf breaking, wake up call to everything. I went into that cathedral, and they were doing a mass, and I sat down next to this old, beautiful woman with all these wrinkles on her face. And she was kneeling on the hard ground. They have that hard ground there in Italy, yes. The floor. And I was watching her and this was like a Wednesday afternoon mass. So my guess is this woman, watching her, the fervor in her face, she probably goes daily. I mean, this woman was really into what she was doing, and watching her kneeling on that hard ground. And I, being somebody who chooses comfort, and I don't kneel often, let's be honest. I watched this woman so faithful in her practice, and it blew me open. And that word ethnocentricity just went through my head, where I thought, okay, how many Americans, Christians, white people, LDS people, whatever, have this thing where they are it, they discovered everything. They did it. They know better. They're the most faithful. I was raised in all those constructs. Like I was raised in a country that thinks it's the best. I was raised in a faith that says they're the one true church. All of the stuff I was raised with blew out the window of that cathedral. And I thought, this woman, like you said, the beauty of that cathedral has topped most of religious buildings I've ever seen. This woman's faith, I haven't seen anyone, that I grew up with kneel down like that and pray the way she prayed. So it changed everything for me. And as such, that's why I've tried to give my kids the gift of travel at a younger age so that they can be better global citizens and realize, like, when we hear about these issues on the news, we actually have met some of the people they affect, and it's just kind of cracked us open to a more globally aware perspective that does make the faith constructs easier in the terms of, like, there's so much more than the Utah-centric church out there, and we have to honor everyone on their journey. We met some beautiful believers of whatever their faith is that makes them a better person. It's great.
That's so key. It shows you that there really are people outside of your window, your viewfinder, we could say. And yes, there's so many ways of existing and living and worshiping and just loving your family, loving your communities, loving your fellow man, and just how that expression can look. It's just so vast and wide and varied and deep. And really, there's nothing quite like experiencing it firsthand. And that's interesting. We started traveling with our kids when my youngest was 10. So yeah, that's been something I wanted for my children as well. There's just so much to learn about the world. The world's just so big. And so by extension, there's so much to learn about people. We don't know it all.
So true.
We don't. Gosh, you've shared so much. I just don't even know where to start. One thing that caught my curiosity, your upbringing was quite open-minded. You defined it as even your mom didn't feel like she fit in one box or the other. It's interesting because the LGBTQ mamas that I've met and talked with and gotten to know, that seems to be somewhat of a thread among, not all. I'm never going to talk in absolutes, but it's fascinating to me that seems to be a part of each of their experience in some way. You said your mindset shift wasn't huge when your son came out, but I'm curious to know what that was like. You shared how it was when your son shared with friends, came out to his friends. What was that like for you as a mom within your communities, your adult communities, whether, that's your faith community, your civic community, but especially in navigating your faith? I have such great hopes and dreams for being able to talk about these things with our fellow siblings in Christ.
Totally. I am kind of known as an open book, and I've had to, of course, adhere to my son's privacy in many ways and all of my, whatever they're going through. But I tend to be somebody, I'm kind of a fixer personality, where when I see something that feels broken, I want to jump in and fix it to the best of my ability, recognizing that I can't change everything. I grew up with big dreams. Like I used to think I'd be the first female president of the United States. And then I kind
love that so much.
Yeah. And reality hit, and I realized that actually, and some people can do a lot in that position, but I learned that for me, I can create the most change working from the ground up rather than the top down. And very quickly, I turned in this space when my son came out. I turned to people who'd been there before. And I read everything I could. I started listening. It was during COVID. So like we had a lot of solitary time where I would go on these long bike rides and I'd listen to all of Richard Ostler's podcast. And I read all these books, and I would talk to any parent I could get my the phone to answer, who had been through this before, or just to learn, like, how can I do this well? How can I be the best, rainbow mama out there, and also like trying to listen to my son and take his cues, but quickly realizing that not everyone was on the same page. And we definitely had close friendships that pulled away, for sure. Absolutely. Some of them were really deep betrayals that, I've heard some of my closest friends who had helped me raise this child, like I've heard things they've said about us or me, and it's, it's hurtful and it's hard to get over.
So sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And I luckily have a great therapist who really was so wise. She's the voice in my head. And one time she told me, I recognize that person in your life might be a great person, but they're not, because I was trying to defend some of these people's behavior. Like they're probably doing it because this or that. She said, I recognize they may be a great person in their space, but they're not a great friend for you right now. And I learned to kind of put up walls and protection and like a fortress. And it was such a great year to do that, where we were all home so much and we could build those walls and redefine our life. We did move during that year as well. And I was able to take up in a new community. I now live in the LDS framework, the zoning where I am. The wards tend to be a little bit more open and a little bit more, like, especially in my ward, like the leadership in my ward right now, I would say are very more progressive. And I'm not saying churches is an easy place for me. I don't think most people would say that I'm the person on the front row at all at church anymore. But I do feel like it's a little more laid back where I live now, that people have respected where we're at. I did have several leaders who wanted to meet with us, and we talked to them about various things. Some conversations went much better than others. I quickly had to learn who I could trust. And what I found was, at first, it's funny because places like going to a temple where there's a rote ritual and a script that is going to be said was less scary than going to a church meeting where you don't know what might be said. So it was kind of interesting because I started having a pretty open conduit to the above the divine, where I would have very strong like promptings or words that would come to me that were so clear. And they were completely different than anything you would think you had heard in Sunday school growing up. Things like, it's okay for you to leave. It's okay for you to walk out. It's okay for you're doing okay. Like, your son's fine. Like, just things that like, I stopped worrying about things. And as I did that more and more, I realized my job right now is to protect my family. And so things became more insular in our community because of where I work at the resource center. That has become, when I turn to scripture, I turn to the Gospels. I like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John the best. That's generally my practice with scriptures.
I love that.
I love that. And it's just Jesus. That phrase, just Jesus, always goes through my head, where I just want some Jesus and I just go straight to the source. And I am not somebody now who is picking up talks or speeches from other people that might be triggering. I just kind of go to Jesus. What did Jesus do? And luckily we have this amazing place in our town where I can work, and I get to just try to be the hands on the ground and we help refugees. We help women in crisis from domestic violence. We help people who are hungry constantly every single day. The place I volunteer is feeding somebody who's hungry. And life gets very simple when you focus on the just Jesus aspect of it. Like, your religious practice can be very simple. And I've been so immensely blessed in many ways to be able to like offer resources and time in my community in a way where I feel a pretty steady flow of spirit in a way that works for me. And so when church is an uncomfortable place for me, I don't feel like I've lost out necessarily on something that used to mean a lot, because church was always something for me that was beyond a building or beyond a wall or beyond a certain practice.
A 17-year-old boy entered his parents' bedroom to reveal a truth he'd been navigating alone for years. In his confession, he not only came out as gay, but also conveyed the depths of the mental health struggles he'd been battling as a result of conflicting messaging he'd endured in the religious institution in which he'd been raised. Autumn McAlpin's haunting literary memoir, But Jesus, A Conversation, replays the various conversations that emerged during one family's coming out story. But Jesus, A Conversation takes us on a journey of a family deconstructing with the use of a compass and their conscience, and reconstructing with the salve that will help bind them the most of all, love. With stunning cover art by J. Kirk Richards, this book intends to offer an open shoulder for all families who find themselves at the intersection of LDS or other conservative faith and LGBTQ+. Published by Pink Umbrella Publishing, the proceeds from the sales of this book will be donated to life-saving therapy programs for the LGBTQ+ community through 501c3 nonprofit Encircle. This would be a thoughtful and heartfelt gift this time of year or any time of year. Links to buy the book on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles are in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode, which is part 2 of my interview with Autumn. Come get coached or learn from watching others get coached. Starting January 2024, I am starting First Friday's free coaching. A faith journey brings a lot of emotions. I am creating a confidential group to bring all of not just the emotions and process them, but bring all the questions, vent frustrations, share fears, express doubts. Navigating a new and uncertain reality is hard enough. Let's remove the worry of judgment from others. In this group, I will help you help yourself so that you can be there for your child, family, loved ones, and for you too. Click the link in the show notes. To sign up, you must complete the agreement and survey. Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.